announcement. I'm not sure of the exact location yet, but keep an eye out for that. We'll continue talking about the City Nature Challenge over the coming weeks and the next couple of months, because it's a big subject as we get closer to April 30th and the City Nature Challenge kickoff. So, of course, iNaturalist is the platform for that. But beyond that, I hope that you read the bio of the Audubon group. I sent that out. I attached it to introduce our speaker this evening, Joe Brewer. He is going to speak with us tonight about New World sparrows and facial feather patterns, and possibly throw in some iNaturalist discussion. He's done an amazing job in the iNaturalist world, and that's kind of how we stalked him and were able to find him. Lena knew and spoke of his work, and we really just are appreciative, Joe, for you being here tonight. Lena, I'm assuming you started the recording. Yes, you did.
Yes.
And Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you. We'll probably try to do a question and answer period at the end. Either you please use the chat feature if you want to ask questions or speak. I bet Joe wouldn't mind if you had a question you just couldn't wait to ask in the middle, but we'll try to maybe save our questions in bulk to the end. And if that's okay with you, Joe.
That's fine with me, yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Joe Brewer, our guest speaker tonight.
And thank you, Glenda.
Thank you.
Getting started, I just want to talk a little about myself. Glenda mentioned a little that they found me on iNaturalist, and I've been doing a lot of my work on iNaturalist for probably going on about 4 years now, and it's been a big outlet of a way for me to reach other people and teach, as well as obtaining photographs of individuals that would otherwise be inaccessible to me. It makes it really searchable, and it's just been a really a nice platform, and I'll talk more about that later on towards the end of my presentation. But I specialize mainly with New World sparrows, which kind of started as what felt like a need for there to be more information, more specialized works on them. I know James Rising did quite a bit of work with them. He authored a couple of guides several years ago, but the majority of guides, I feel, just kind of skip over a lot of the finer details, which I think make the missing of the finer details makes it hard to grasp a good understanding of easy ways to identify sparrows. So I kind of wanted to cover a little bit about that today. I'm going to be featuring work from an artist that I'm working with on a field guide of my own to sparrows. So you'll be getting what is a first look at a lot of that artwork, as it's still in the works, and I actually haven't displayed these photos for anybody else. And we'll talk a little bit about how understanding these features can be worked into using it in the field, and a large part of the time in photographs. Having a photograph of the bird certainly makes it a lot easier to sit back and kind of really take a look at all the finer details. And this photo we have here is actually a photo I did about 3 or 4 years ago for an article that I wrote to help people understand the terminology that I used on iNaturalist, because I used a lot of, I guess you would call them sciencey terms, but I try to stick with the more easy to understand terms, but I would get a lot of questions about what it was I was talking about, or a lot of people would just simply agree without maybe fully understanding what it was I was talking about. So I made this post, and excuse me, it got quite a bit of traction. I've kind of expanded on it a little bit over the years, but I haven't really updated it. But today would kind of be an updated version of that. And it was linked to my iNaturalist bio, and I assume probably what garnered a little bit of attention for why I'm here tonight. But we'll just move right in, and I'm going to start here by talking about, we're going to start at the top of the head, and we're going to kind of work our way down the side of the face and ending up down here at the throat. But we're going to talk about this middle stripe, or the median crown stripe. We've got this white-throated sparrow here. I have them illustrated on the right, and I have a picture of them on the left. I've highlighted the crown stripe in red here and here. And now, this feature in and of itself isn't particularly helpful in many cases. Majority of times, it's going to be of pale contrast if it's present, and the presence or absence of it can lead to the identification of some species, but more or less it gives an overall look to the crown. And in that note, I kind of want to move on here. I'm going to compare two very similar zono species sparrows. We have our white-throated here again on the side, and we're going to take a look at this median crown stripe. Now it's super thin. And I'm going to take a look over here at how wide we have on this one. And the substitute of these other stripes kind of like shrinks the whole pattern on this side down, while giving our white-throated sparrow kind of a different look. And so even in similar species, something as simple as what most people look over can be really helpful and noting. But again, it's not really a feature I think a lot of time is spent with, but it is still helpful to know. And then moving on again here with the white-crowned sparrow from before, wanted to take a look at the lateral crown stripes. Now these actually make up the two stripes that give a lot of sparrows, like think of a song sparrow or a Lincoln sparrow, that striped crown pattern. And then in the zono sparrows, it's what gives them that zone crown appearance, with the connection of the eye line completing in the back. And here we have an illustration of the same thing. Here on the roughest crown, we can see that median crown stripe kind of dissipates here, leading to more of a full solid crown color. We have a nice firm contrast up front. And then when we look over here at the song sparrow, we can see how the addition of streaking adds kind of a different context to the crown. A lot of times in the field you would stop at, well, it's got a roughest crown. But even if we were to focus only on the crown, ignoring the rest of the bird, there's still, distinctions to be made from the context of what these lateral crown stripes contain. And again, things like this are really helpful in photos and separating tricky species. An example of this would be, I don't have a photo of a Lincoln sparrow on the screen here, but Lincoln sparrows, they share a similar crown coloration to many of the eastern song sparrows and some of the coastal western song sparrows, but there's a different quality to the streaking. So this black streak here on this song sparrow comes all the way back. On Lincoln sparrows, it's typically very fine, and the median crown stripe is a lot less messy, with a lot of gray running through it. And again, it adds to an overall crown pattern feature, and which can be helpful on many species, but overall just lending to the overall crown coloration. And when we have your outliers here, this is a immature Harris's sparrow that I photographed in my yard several years ago. If we take a look at the crown here, we can see that each individual feather is kind of edged in a pale coloring, and his lateral crown stripes blend pretty well with a median crown stripe that matches to just give us an overall crown with no distinct patterning. And now the pattern groups are still there, but many species think along the lines of like a chipping sparrow. During the winter, they can have distinct lateral crown stripes, and then in the summer they'll swap out the distinct lateral crown stripes for a solid rufous crown, and often lose the median crown stripe to make it just one solid color. So there's actually some changes that can take place, and a lot of changes that take place when sparrows molt from winter to summer take place in the face, and a lot of the time the crown in particular. Species such as swamp sparrows can show distinct lateral crown stripes in the winter, and then again in the summer they'll molt those out for a solid rufous crown, and again can become sometimes easy to confuse with chipping sparrows if you were to only be looking at the crown without taking into context other features. But I'm going to continue to move down here, and just under that lateral crown stripe we have the supercilium, or as what most people refer to as the eyebrow, and that's typically what I refer to it as, because typically people can everybody looks at, yeah, that's the eyebrow of the bird. It comes right over the eye. I mean, it's easy to understand. There's no real reason to use, more complicated words. So this is one of those things where it's a personal preference. And I feel that way about a lot of the terms I use. As you'll kind of come to see, there's no real standardized wording. It varies from author to author. It varies from person to person. A lot of it has to do with preference and understanding. But there's no often correct or incorrect way to choose which words you want to use. I mean, it's all about what gets your point across the best. Supercilium just is a word that is used in more scientific context. A lot of authors use it when describing birds in literature, and it's just a little bit more specific. But if this area starts from the base of the bill and is separated by the eye line, if we imagine the eye line continuing forward, comes over and it borders this lateral crown stripe and comes to the back. Now, we have this clay-colored sparrow on the left next to this American tree sparrow. We can see how the clay-colored sparrows are known for that tan eyebrow. A lot of people, when I see them marking out what makes them think that a bird was a clay-colored sparrow, it's the brown tan eyebrow and then the brown or tan cheek. So it's something that really stands out on them. And by comparison, we have the same American tree sparrow from the first photo, without the supercilium highlighted. And this gray pattern lends a more stoic look to it. And it's something that would contrast easily in the field, even though you're looking at a sparrow. And when working even with like something such as a Brewer sparrow, clay-colored sparrows do tend to have very buffy eyebrows or buffy superciliums, and Brewer sparrows tend to have more gray, but many of those birds can approach the brown. But if we were to look at the content of a Brewer sparrow, we would see a lot more fine streaking throughout, and also along the nape. There's other marks that we can use, but it's often not mentioned in guides because there's easier marks to use, but this mark is probably just as consistent, but it involves a little bit more understanding about the makeup, and I think some authors are afraid to go into that with the standardization, without the standardization of words and a known understanding. But I really feel that it's something that should be paid attention to, even in birds that you think you know. For example, chipping sparrows. If we think about a chipping sparrow and breeding plumage, it would have a very gray supercilium, like this American tree sparrow here on the right. But come wintertime, when they molt again, and a lot of those changes take place to the face, they can approach superciliums that are just as brown as a clay colored, and a lot of those birds get reported and misidentified as clay colored sparrows. And I think that having an understanding of the changes in places again can help alleviate some of these situations. And here on this next slide, we're just talking about the supercilium. This is the supraloral, and it is just the beginning portion of that part that we just talked about. And we're going to jump right on to the next screen here, because I want to illustrate the two very common species that everybody associates this part of the face with. And that's the Savannah sparrow we have here up top, and then a white-throated sparrow I have here on the bottom. And that supraloral is that little yellow patch that everybody talks about on these two birds. And now, I know a lot of authors, and I've seen a lot of people on iNaturalist, for instance, explaining IDs. We cut to using just lores. We say Savannah sparrows show yellow lores, or we say white-throated has yellow in the lores. And I mean, that's correct in the sense that it's in front of the eye. But like if we take a look down here at this white-throated sparrow, we can actually see that it has a dark loral line. And this is a trait that can be present or absent, but it's also a trait that becomes necessary and helpful to distinguish. What comes to mind is that young song sparrows can actually show yellow in the supraloral, but they don't ever show a dark loral line to go along with it. And immature white-throated sparrows and immature song sparrows can be kind of tricky to separate when they're young, and it becomes a feature that's helpful in distinguishing the two. But it also becomes helpful to be able to distinguish that when we're talking about the dark lores or the dark loral line, we're not referencing the yellow above or vice versa. So I think that it's something that it doesn't necessarily bother me when I see even educators referring it to that because it's technically correct. I just think it could create problems in situations where not having the words we need to separate the distinction come into play. So, but it is probably one of my favorite parts of a New World sparrow too, because this area undergoes a lot of change in color throughout many species. Like American tree sparrows typically show bright white there. Sage sparrows would be another example of showing bright white there. And it really just varies from species to species. But expanding on that, the supra from supraloral means above. So the definition is literally above the lores. And we're going to continue on here to the lores, and perhaps the most famous bird's lores would be the chipping sparrow, for having the dark lores or a dark loral line extends from in front of the eye to the bill. Other species such as lark sparrows show this trait. We just talked about the white-throated sparrow, how some of them can also show this trait. And this feature perhaps most helpful on a chipping sparrow. There are other species that show it being referenced. It's not something that comes up often, and here's probably the best example of when it's necessary, and that's when we're comparing a chipping sparrow with a clay-colored sparrow. And the first thing that probably stands out to a lot of people is the absence of this little line here on our clay-colored sparrow. Now, there are chipping sparrows that lack that line. I think I've reviewed probably over 3,000 photographs of chipping sparrows from both the eastern and western population. And I would say I've come across maybe 3 or 4 that had no sign of a laurel line at all, but were definitely still chipping sparrows by other field marks. So it's a very dependable mark. It's dependable when present and dependable when absent. So it goes both ways. There's not many cases where it comes up, but again, it's just one of those parts that's good to know. And then the next part, kind of in continuing along with the laurel section, I'm going to be talking about the laurel mask, which is like this dark shading. Comes down from the bottom of the bill to the top of the bill and then extends back and just around the eye. Now I have a pink-sided junco up here, and I have a gray-headed junco down here. And I also want to mention, you'll notice that some of these photos don't have credits on them, and that's because they're my photos, and it felt weird just crediting myself, so I just didn't put anything on them. So if you see uncredited photos, that is because they're mine. Any photos that I use from iNaturalist or from people that lent them to me for the use of education will be marked as such by the person who lent them. But I just wanted to mention that. I forgot to mention that at the beginning, but going back into it. These laurel masks can be helpful for separating obviously different subspecies of dark-eyed juncos. It's a big topic that comes up with pink-sided juncos that occasionally make their way down into the area. But I do want to say that it should be used with caution because of, like, we can look at, if we can see on this pink-sided junco here, how there's the feathers are actually kind of a different quality in this area. And when a bird loses feathers in this area, or they get damaged from feeding, can give the false impression of a laurel mask. And many organ group juncos can actually show a dark laurel mask. So it gets kind of muddies the waters of using that as a definitive mark for birds such as the pink-sided junco. So, and then next we have the eye line. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's just the line that comes out that's behind the rear of the eye. They vary in shape, size, and color. It also varies depending on how the bird has positioned its head. An erect bird will have a drooping eye line, and a bird that's a little bit more compacted down, like on this chipping sparrow right here, will have a line that is a bit more straight and less drooped because all the feathers are kind of bunched up together. The biggest use of this, again, is the shape and shading. It comes into play with, I think, a few more birds than some people realize. A good example I have here is we have this rufous crowned sparrow, and we can see this eye line. It's really thin. It kind of splatters out, but it matches in color to the nape, the crown, and the mantle back here. If we compare it to this chipping sparrow, who has a similar crown that may and has drawn people to conclude that it could possibly be a rufous crowned sparrow. I mean, it certainly has rufous in the crown. If we drop a little lower, we can see that the eye lines are actually quite different. And that also includes this laurel line that we talked about. But that's a very small section of a bird to try and pick out if you don't have a photograph or a clean photograph, or you're just seeing it and it flies by. And you're like, I saw a flash of some rufous in the crown, but I also saw some flash of black below it. These little details can kind of help add up to make an identification. But if we were to sit here and pick out everything, then I would start to pick out that this bird's eye ring is pretty complete. And then if we come over here, you can see that this chipping sparrow's eye line is broken right here and broken right here, which will lead me into my next point, which is the eye ring. A lot of authors refer to this as the orbital ring. Again, I think eye ring gets the point across. Everybody knows exactly what you're talking about. And the two main differences I want to talk about here, and in birds that have it, now all birds have the orbital ring feathers. Typically, whenever somebody says eye ring, they're referring to a stark contrast, which is typically white. And birds that don't have any contrast, it just kind of blends in the same color as the surrounding feathers. But the two main differences would be ones that are complete, like on this field sparrow here on the right, and then broken or incomplete, like this American tree sparrow on the left. And that's a distinction that can come in handy quite often. I've seen chipping sparrows identified as vesper sparrows. And again, there's lots of points to be made of why those two species are different. But the clear common association between them that I would probably lead somebody to make a misidentification is that vesper sparrows are known for having very bold eye rings. And chipping sparrows can also show bold eye rings. But if we were to take a look, again, we have this little break here in the back on this chipping sparrow on the left and on the front. And just like on a vesper or on this field sparrow even that I have here, this eye ring is still complete. And again, I think another reason a lot of people don't associate rings with chipping sparrows is from that good old winter to breeding change. In the breeding months, it's not that common for a chipping sparrow to have white in the eye ring. They're typically gray. The feathers have worn down. There's really just not many birds that would stand out as having one. I actually had to look around a little bit to find one of these. Ended up just having to go back to Greg for it. But the breaks are typically always present on the chipping sparrow. Now you may find field and other birds that typically show a complete eye ring, such as grasshopper sparrows. There often may be a little break in the back here where the eye line meets, and it's because the eye line and this section of the eye ring often share the same color, which is also why chipping sparrows have a broken eye ring. It's because the lores are dark, and then the orbital feathers right here share the same color. So it's something to note when you're seeing a bird with an eye that catches your eye, as to how complete is that bold eye ring. In addition, not only how bold is it, but Does it make it all the way around? Is it broken in the front? Is it broken in the back? And moving down from the eye, we have the auricular, or the cheek. And I'm just going to call it cheek because I don't like saying that other word. And I've said it, I mean, I've typed it mostly on paper. It's not a word I use a lot. So that's probably the only time I'm going to say it. I'm not even sure if I pronounced it right, but moving on. And it's essentially just this, on this lark sparrow, it's conveniently already highlighted in red for me. And it's just this little patch right here. And this is the group of feathers that also kind of acts as the little protection for the ear underneath. And if we look right here, in this little area right here, we can see that it's actually a paler color than the rest of the cheek. And that is because these feathers are actually structurally different, allowing more sound to pass through. So if you see like a lot of birds that have colored cheeks will still have this little pale spot that kind of contrasts to the rest of it majority of the time in angles that you're looking at it. And there's not too much to say about cheek color. In the Spizella genus, chipping, clay colored Brewers, it's helpful to note the cheek color. And here I have a swamp sparrow and a Nielsen sparrow, just to kind of illustrate that confined cheek pattern. But there's really few cases to where you need to examine these for any type of purpose. It's really just kind of something that adds to the overall impression of a bird's facial pattern, because it is a large part of the face, so it just sticks out. But if we come down, we have that line that runs along the bottom of the cheek. They're the subauricular stripe, or well, this is probably where a lot of you will differ from me, because it was established by many authors for a long time. This was the moustachial stripe, and I believe many guides still use that today. I believe Sibley does or doesn't. I'm not sure where I learned the first one subauricular stripe. It's one I've been using for a long time, but not one that I've seen used a whole lot in literature. But I find that moustachial stripe and submoustachial stripe and all those get a little confusing. And it was confusing for me in the beginning when I was first learning sparrows and trying to name out all the different sections of the face. I kept finding myself being confused as to which was the mustache and which was the sub-mustache. And then I found that a lot of people kind of use them interchangeably, and it really just kind of muddied the waters for me. So I looked for something distinct to say, so that I could in my mind separate them out. But come to the next page here, we'll have the same Savannah sparrow without that mark highlighted, and it's that dark line that runs all the way down and along the back. And then we have another famous sparrow with his little double lines. The top line here is that stripe, that subauricular stripe. And presence and absence is something to note for. It changes the overall impression of the face again. If we were to compare this Henslow's to, say, a grasshopper sparrow, or like a LeConte sparrow, something that doesn't lack it, it gives a much more clean impression of the face. But with birds that have thin ones like this, the way the feathers lay, often create shadows that can give the false impression that there is one. And the instances where you're relying on that to make a call probably aren't the ones that you would want to put a lot of weight into that. But again, it's not really something that comes up a lot. It's just something that adds to the overall impression of the face. And the I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, the overall, just the impression. But because for me, I think some, like, even like this Henslow's sparrow, it's got that look where it's almost just kind of angry, if you know what I mean. While the Savannah just kind of doesn't really have a whole lot of thoughts going on in there. And it's a combination of all these subtle features that may not come up a lot in identification, but they add to the overall impression that you get whenever you're looking at the face of a sparrow. Excuse me. And then we're going to move on. This one will probably be where a lot more people branch off from their understanding or use of words to what I use. I call this the mailer stripe, and largely in field guides, mainly older field guides, it was called the submustachial stripe. And that's where the confusion came in for me. Because I didn't, on birds that didn't have the submustachial stripe, which is quite a few, the mallard still referenced. It really just kind of got confusing me. But mailer for a lot of people means this darker stripe underneath, but we'll get to that here in a minute. But for me, I'm going to call this the mailer, and that's this little group of feathers that runs along down bottom of the cheek underneath that first dark line, and it comes back around on some species, and sometimes it kind of gets blocked off here at the end, like how Noah illustrated it in his illustration. You can see how it just kind of peters out. I've highlighted it here in red. And this mark of Lincoln's, which is probably one of the species that gets it mentioned more often whenever you're comparing it to a song sparrow. I have a Lincoln's here on the left and a song on the right. And that reference to it, which was how I was first largely exposed to the word mailer, was people referencing the color of this part right here, and how it's a soft buffy color versus, in comparison to most song sparrows, especially those in the Mideast, or that breed in the Mideast and the eastern portion of the US and Canada, they lack pretty much any color here at all. And it's just largely white. This bird, I can't remember what he based it off of. It feels like a Montanus to me, but there are species that kind of show a little bit of color. But for largely, by looking at the face of a Lincoln's or a song, you can make a decision off just the mailer right here. And that's something that gets brought up a lot, but it's also something that brings a lot of confusion, I think, because of people assuming, again, that this stripe here is the mailer. And that comes into play with Sibley's guides. He opted to start using the word mailer and then renamed these to the lateral throat stripes. But we'll continue a little bit about that right now. These are the big old triangle marks that most people reference on song sparrows. In addition to that little dot right there, which I will talk about a little as well. We're coming back to these triangular marks here on the throat what I call lateral throat stripes. Back in the day, they were called mailer stripes. So there's always kind of been a distinction between mailer and mailer stripe. But I think some people still kind of get confused on that. But again, it doesn't really matter what you call it as long as people are understanding what you're trying to convey. Whatever makes the most sense to you would be what I would go with. I personally use lateral throat stripe because coming into it, I had already adopted the use of the word mailer for the section that we just covered. It was would be kind of a hard change for me. I started with Sibley's Guide, so lateral throat stripe was just what I've always known it as. But this mark is particularly useful in many ways. Here we have a Lincoln's on the right and a song on the left, and if we take a look at how the Lincoln's mailer is kind of speckled, like it has darker portions in it. We got some white mixed in there. Overall, it's just not as full if we come over and look at this song sparrows. And that same thing holds true for many species. Savanna typically don't show as bold lateral throat stripes as song sparrows do. Neither do vesper sparrows. And the density and thickness of those marks can actually hold quite a bit of information. And then if we take a look at these are two song sparrows. One was photographed in Moore County, New Mexico, and then one from Texas. And this bird on the right is most likely an eastern song sparrow. He's got these dark burgundy red mailers and lateral throat stripes. He's got these soft beige, not buff like a Lincoln's, but softer and a little bit warmer mailer. And then we come over here to this bird. He's got a little bit more of a white mailer, and his lateral throat stripe's been diminished quite a bit, and it's actually a little bit orange in color. And this bird is actually a mountain song sparrow, or Montania subspecies. So it's little distinctions like this where you're picking up on subtle differences, where things like this can really kind of help to shed light on things that may come off as weird, especially for somebody who saw eastern song sparrows in their yard every single day, and then coming over west a little bit more, where you start to see more of these mountain song sparrows. It can be a little challenging. And then we're going to move on to the throat. I really didn't have a whole lot for this because it's not like a section that's really, I think, needs a whole lot of explaining. I've highlighted it here in red on this Harris's sparrow. And it's just the section directly under the bill, above the breast. Streaking or no streaking is typically what you're going to be looking for. Example of that would be song on Lincoln's again. Song sparrows typically show clean throats without any streaking, while Lincoln's typically show a fair amount of streaking on the throat. Not a whole lot of instances where that makes a lot of differences in the identification, or like can be helpful in some way, but it does come up occasionally. And then I think we're going to finish off here with the nape. And now, when I say nape, and I use a lot in my identifications on iNaturalist, I'm talking about all of this, where these feathers kind of come down and lay on the mantle. And the nape, I think, is probably one of the most overlooked areas. I think a lot of people think, oh, well, I can't see the face. There's no way I'm going to be able to ID this. You know, guides don't mention anything really about the backside of sparrows. And I think it's a shame because I think a lot of sparrows are really generally unique on the back of the head. This is a white-crowned sparrow. And we can see that nifty little pattern going on back here. And I want to bring that back around to a white-throated sparrow. When we have our white crown here on the left again. Let's take a look at the nape on this white-throated sparrow. Notice how there's lots of color changes going on. It's got dark centering to the feathers, give it this nice streaked impression. And then take a look at the how the supercilium comes down, just right here. But comes down in a downward projection, and the eye line just kind of ends on its own right here. If we follow this bird's eye line all the way, comes all the way back, just around the nape. And that supercilium comes all the way around up here. And these nape sides, all of this right here. And then the median crown stripe again, thinner. So with these two fairly similarly crowned birds, from behind without seeing any of the yellow on the face or the white on the throat, you would be able to confidently ID one as a white crowned or a white throated. And I think that things like this are often overlooked by guides because it gets harder to find people who are willing to photograph photos of birds from behind as well. I think a lot of people like to post the best photographs that they have. Obviously, if a bird's not looking at you, we don't consider, most time won't consider that the best photograph that we have. Maybe if it was the only photograph we got, we would post it. I personally go out of my way to photograph the backside of many sparrows and just share them and post them for the use of other people learning what the backside of these species look like, because I think it's something that does come in handy, especially with birds that are always running away from you. And then to extend more on that, I have the swamp sparrow, this Nielsen sparrow again. We take a look at the nape. They both have this great collar that comes around, a little buff on this Nielsen's. But let's take a look at how it's divided down. The lateral crown stripes of this swamp sparrow come all the way down. They kind of fizzle out, but they still do a good job of breaking apart that gray collar into three sections here. If we come over and look at this Nielsen's, we'll see that his gray median crown stripe actually stops just at the nape. He has this brown wash. Comes all the way over. His head's a little turned, so we can see how it's kind of pulling this nape over to the side a little bit. We still have the gray color on the other side. So now looking at these, if we were to just get a quick glance at back patterns, I would agree that they're fairly similar. We do have a little bit of white highlighting here on that Nielsen sparrow, which could be a clue if he was flushing away from us, or if we got a good look at him sitting on a branch before he dove down. But what if I notice something like this, where I can see that the lateral crown stripes are clearly visible, or can see that the gray of his nape continues up into the rear of the supercilium a little bit, then it's situations like that where I think that knowing these different parts and knowing these different sections can become quite a good tool. It doesn't even necessarily mean that you have to get a good look at the bird's face. You can have situations like this where we can't even see the face of these birds, but I can point out several details that would allude us to the ID. Um, but yeah, I think that's about it on the my feather presentation. Um, Here I've listed the people on iNaturalist who submitted photos as Creative Commons, which allows me to use their photos in this work. These were CCO, so I didn't even have to contribute names to the people on the left. I chose to do so because I think you should always be credited for your work. But a big thanks to them for making that available. I'd also want to say thanks to Noah Arthur. He is my illustrator for my guide. He let me, like I said earlier, he let me use a lot of those illustrations that you saw. And moving on from here, I did want to talk a little bit about the City Nature Challenge and a little bit about iNaturalist as well. I participated in the last two City Nature Challenges. They're really a great way of getting the public involved. And by public, I mean it's a good way to get students of schools that typically don't participate in iNaturalist or maybe even in nature at all, or getting friends together. It's a good way to have a goal that's obtainable by a city that includes a lot of people that may otherwise not have been engaging with nature. And I think that is a really awesome way to kind of spread the awareness that a lot of the things around us need. And it focuses on your own city, and it focuses you to kind of take a bigger picture and a look around about everything. As Linda said, it is through iNaturalist, which and as I've said, I believe many a times throughout this, that I do a lot of work for iNaturalist as well. I would not work, but volunteer work. I think I've contributed on iNaturalist alone. I think I've contributed about 40,000 New World Sparrow IDs. It's just a great place for sharing knowledge, sharing observation with others. But the City Nature Challenge takes advantage of that and allowing people that aren't necessarily familiar with nature or aspects of it to the point where they may ignore it, to take a look at it, submit it, and then possibly have a takeaway from that leaves them with a desire to learn more, or maybe in learning something about that, they continue to go forward and learn about something that they found that they have an interest in, or discover something local to them that they never knew. And it's fun for even naturalists as well. I enjoyed the competitive part of it. In 2018 or 2019, I can't remember which year. It was one of those years before, whenever it was a kind of like a see who could get the most identifications, who could get the most observations. Due to COVID, I believe last year's was a more of a cooperative thing. It was more about how many could the world get. And I don't believe they've said this year what it's going to be, but either way, I think both are great outcomes. It's really fun for me, being an IDer, to see such a huge influx of observations and just general interaction with people who are relatively new to the site, or people that have been on the site for a while but maybe didn't really use it a whole lot. And it's just a really great way to get a lot of people involved. So I'm really excited that that is something that's going to be focused on for your chapter this year. Um, and moving in a little bit more to that, I do want to talk about iNaturalist in general, and how I'm not going to give a rundown exactly on how it works. I do recommend that if it's something that sounds of interest to you, or if you plan on participating in the City Nature Challenge, that you familiarize yourself a little bit with iNaturalist. The I think a lot of you are probably familiar with eBird, and how it differs in such a way is that it requires the evidence of seeing or the existence of an organism. Say you have photo, um, a recording of sound, or tracks that the animal left, um, and when you submit these, it's in a almost like a social media public platform type of arrangement, where other people can agree or disagree with what you have ID'd it as, or if you have no idea what it is that you're seeing, you can submit it and people can offer IDs for you, which is really nice, especially for someone like me who is really proficient with things that are sparrow, but not so proficient with things that also share the habitat with sparrows. But I do have an interest for them, so it's really nice to maybe catch a dragonfly or a certain beetle species while I'm laying down photographing sparrows, and being able to photograph that and submit it, and then have somebody whose specialty is that particular type of organism give me an ID, and then be able to answer questions that I have about it. And that was always really cool to me, and which is a large part about why I've started offering my time to iNaturalist, um, because I really enjoy making things easier for people to identify. I think that's a big part of loving nature, is knowing what you're seeing and being able to identify what you see without it being a challenging thing. I think it should be easy, it should be fun. I mean, things are going to be harder, but I think you should be able to have all the available tools that you need and all the available help that you need. And I think the access to people through iNat is a very special thing. They talk a lot about how, yes, it does provide scientific data, or data that could be used in a scientific manner. You have these observations that can be identified to, in case of birds, you can go to subspecies level. um, and then I know that the taxonomic makeup of other chains is a little bit different, but all that information that is there and available. There, aside from the access, there's information such as they keep track of the endangerment status of species. When I did curator work for them, I worked largely on that, on updating the endangerment status of species all over the U.S. I focused mainly on sparrows, of course, but and it taught me a lot. And I think that it's a really big good way to share knowledge. And I think the more people that join to learn will also be the more people that are there to teach others. And the more people that we can get doing that, I think the more we can get caring about nature. And I really that really is a big goal of mine, and I think it's a big goal of iNaturalist. Their main goal is to get people interested in caring about these things so that we can protect them. And I think they've done a great job facilitating a very welcoming environment and a collaboration of people from all different areas to really make something that is beneficial in many ways to even birders who, I mean, I think you see a lot of the debate between eBird and iNaturalist, and I think that it's two different sets of two different ways of interacting, and I think they both have their places, and I think both are very great, and I think that both do amazing things. But I don't think that the two can be compared on a scale like that. So I guess I'll end that by saying that I encourage you to check out iNaturalist. They have many help pages about how to use their site and the benefits of doing so and how to go about getting IDs and stuff. But I think that's all that I have. I guess if there's any questions, I would be more than willing to answer any of those.
Now I have a question.
All right.
So in ranges that overlap in sparrows, have you noticed any hybridization?
There is quite a bit of hybridization. It really just depends on the genus and species. It often isn't between species, I guess you would think. Like perhaps one of the most common hybrids would be a dark-eyed junco X white-throated sparrow, which is quite an interesting combination. But as far as similar birds, like the Spizella genus, like clay-colored field sparrow, chipping, there's not really a whole lot of hybridization that goes on between them. It's more marshland species like the sharp-tailed sparrow, the Nielsen's and salt marsh tend to hybridize frequently where they overlap. But the cases of it happening are many, but in terms of how frequently it happens between those species, it's not really that high.
Hey, do you guys you have smell-o-vision? Smell these hyacinths. Oh my God.
It's beautiful. How about any more questions?
I have one actually.
All right.
Could you put up the black and white illustration you had on the first slide? If it's easy to go back.
I believe.
Yes, that one. So here's my question.
Okay.
9 items on here. You're in the field. You don't have a camera. You're getting flashes here and there of sightings of a bird. Which of these would you recommend focusing on? And maybe there's no answer, but I thought I would ask.
That is I think an answer that would change with the bird. I personally, what my eye goes to is number 1, the supercilium, and then number 9, which is the lateral crown stripe. I think these two they offer the most in terms of the general impression of the bird. Like say if you caught a flash of a white, like a white crowned sparrow, obviously those would be the two most prominent parts. But if we caught looking down, like if we just caught like just the bottom part of the bird, then well, he would just be mostly gray, and that really doesn't notch off that many species. Whereas how they look from above that midpoint can really narrow down a majority of more. Catching the bottom part of the face, I guess, when it's different, and you know, but when it's not, it leaves you kind of without a whole lot of anything to go off of.
Okay. Perfect answer. Honestly.
I have a question about your field guide. Is that something that's going to be years in the making? Are you right smack in the middle of it, or where are you on that?
As it sits right now, I've written the account for the entire Spizella genus, and he has illustrated, I believe he's illustrated 25 species now. He's completed the Zono genus, Spizella, and a couple of others. And so I would say it's probably about 30% of the way finished on his part. Maybe 10 or 15% finished the way on my part as far as being written. And that, I think I've been working on it for about a year now. But the majority of that year was reaching out to various ornithologists and well-known birders in seeking of information, as well as revising a lot of the information that I have. But my goal for it to be out within the next 2 years.
Awesome. Well, that's a huge undertaking. I certainly have a lot of admiration for you tackling that. And
let us know, Joe, when that comes out.
Oh, well, for sure.
Yeah, and let us know, I mean, if there were anything in the future that we could assist and be any help to you, please don't hesitate to ask us.
Absolutely, yeah.
You've done a huge favor for us this evening. And I'm going to tell you, you're really good at it. You're a great presenter. You did a fantastic job.
Well, thank you. I thank you all so much for the opportunity. It's been kind of something I've wanted to do for a while, but it's not really something I kind of knew how to jump into doing. So I've really enjoyed it, and I mean I've really had fun giving it. So I'm glad you all enjoyed it as well.
Well, you should all,
excellent.
Yeah, you should all know that I didn't give Joe much to go on. I simply we asked if he would do this for us, and he pretty much has just given us the best presentation we could have hoped for tonight. So thank you, Joe. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, if there aren't any more questions, we're going to close the meeting, but sending you off again with our thanks.
All right. Yeah, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.